bump, and what are the implications for the Tories and the NDP? Our Sunday strategy session is here to talk about that. Kathleen Monk is former Director of Communications to the late Jack Layton. Scott Reid is former Communications Director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. And Shakir Chambers is a former Conservative strategist and now Vice President with Oyster Group. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Scott, is this sort of the perfect storm for the Liberals and the less than perfect storm for the Tories?
Well, let's get away from weather metaphors since it's pounding the country with snow this week. But look, the Carney effect is real. How large is the lift for the Liberals? Polls differ. How long will it last? Are we in the beginning of something, the middle of something, the end of something? We don't know. But if you're a political party, your response is going to be dictated on the basis of who exactly you are. So the Conservatives had to take this for real. They have to take this super seriously, and they have to reevaluate everything that they're doing. They have to assume that this is turning around what the election question is going to be. And if you're the Liberals, it's almost the polar opposite. You've really got to keep yourself in check. No bragging, no boasting. You can't even afford to believe this is real yet. Just keep working, keep your head down, and try to maintain and continue this trend. But I don't think there's any question. Something's going out. There has been a tremor in the force, and it must be concerning to the Conservatives.
Do the Conservatives, Shakir, think it's real?
I think when you look at the numbers for Carney, I think there's a lot of view that, he's a blank slate right now. And I think for a lot of Canadians, they're able to project whatever they want him to be as a candidate, right? So I think that's part of his success right now. I think a part of his success as well is him being very silent. He hasn't done a lot of interviews, whether it's on this show or any other mainstream show or any other podcast or whatnot, op-eds, in contrast to Chrystia Freeland. He hasn't really staked out any, policy positions outside of his views on what he would do with a carbon tax, for example. And he really hasn't been tested in a leadership race, right? This hasn't really been combative. As a political rookie, you would think that, he'd get the opportunity to sharpen his skills, and that hasn't really happened either. So I think he's getting a bump right now, but we'll see once he becomes prime minister and, if we go into a general election and he faces the constant barrage of questions or faces the constant attack from opposition leaders, I think some of that shine will wear off, and we'll see how he juggles, some of those more ferocious attacks once he becomes leader of the party.
Yeah, I think it's totally fair, Kathleen, to say that obviously a general election campaign is not going to be the same as what's happening right now. I think Carney has put out some economic policy this week, but I think Shakir's also right that it has largely, at this point at least, gone untested. At the same time, I was interviewing Leger this week, one of the pollsters from Leger, and he was saying that what seems to have increased among Canadians is an awareness of just the resume. The fact that before every headline it says former Bank of Canada governor. And that in of itself has clearly, at this point at least, resonated with Canadians. Is that not something to take note of for opposition parties?
For sure it is. And it's not just Carney's resume, but it's also the absence of Justin Trudeau. Because his negatives were so strong, the Liberals have gone from what was a funeral march to their certain death to really a faint hope of possibly saving more of the furniture and saving these seats. And I think that's significant. No matter how much Shakir wants to tamp down their joy, there has to be some joy in reading these numbers, But why is that? Is it because Carney's, the new messiah, or is it basically because we have this reality TV kind of president in Donald Trump who has completely rewritten the script in terms of Canadian politics? And everyone is scrambling what to do. And I would say even that the Liberals have to scramble too, because they've done some things. They've certainly motivated their base. They've started to steal some of that progressive vote back, both from the New Democrats and from the Bloc and the Greens. They may even have pulled back some of those what we call blue Liberals or red Tories that are more conservative leaning, but they haven't eaten in really to that granite rock base of the Conservative support. So the Conservatives are still at around 40%. They need to be chipping away another 5+, possibly up to 10 points off of those numbers if they really want to form a government, whether that's a minority or a majority.
What are your thoughts on that, Scott? Because I did find it interesting, even in Abacus, which showed the least gain for the Liberals, let's say, or the least narrowing of the gap. They did see the Liberals go up at the NDP's expense, not at the Conservatives' expense. And lots of the other polls are showing that, yeah, you're getting those what they're calling charade Conservatives and a lot of the NDP base. Do they need something different beyond that?
Oh, of course. I mean, look, what they need is a winning coalition. But, Carney appears to have put them back in the game. And I think we know why. It's because Trudeau's gone and Trump is here. And, you know, if you think there's pressure on the Liberals to find the next gear, imagine the pressure that Pierre Poilievre is feeling to find any gear other than the one that he has typically displayed for the past, not just a couple years as leader, but 10 years as a politician. I mean, this guy has always been pure anger, no answers. Well, now, with a focus on Trump and what are we going to do? Now that the country is looking for a wartime leader, because make no mistake, we appear to be in an economic and trade war with the United States, they are going to be asking all of them, including Carney and Poilievre, what are your answers? And I think that's going to be the challenge for Poilievre. It's not just to reorient his campaign slogans and the rhyming couplets he uses to get through press conferences. It's what are the answers to the tough questions, the tough and inescapable questions that now confront Canada. Carney looks like a guy who knows how to put together an answer. He's been there before. Poilievre, the jury's out.
There's going to be some effort underway, Shakir, to try and, I don't know what the right word is, but in every column I read, it's rebrand, right? Move from axe the tax to quote unquote Canada first. There's going to be ad money behind that. There's also going to be ad money behind attacking Mark Carney directly, even in advance of him becoming the leader. What do you think the next few weeks for the Conservatives has to look like, Shakir?
I think, you know, it makes sense to have a more nationalist kind of tone, given, you know, the rally around the flag moment. That definitely makes sense. But I don't think this notion of removing the carbon tax messaging or axe the tax, I don't think they're going to go in that direction. And I say that because at the core of removing the carbon tax is an affordability message. And I still think affordability is going to be on the ballot in the next election. I mean, if you look at Ontario as a case study, Doug Ford is doing all he can to make tariffs the central issue in the provincial campaign. And if you look at public polling, that's not the number one issue to Ontarians. Cost of living is higher, healthcare is higher, housing affordability is higher than focusing on Donald Trump and his tariffs. And so that might be a microcosm of what we'll see on the federal level as well. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense to pivot off the affordability message as strongly as some people suggest, because I still think that's going to be a big issue come E-Day. I also think for the Conservatives, you know, when we start talking about domestic issues, I think a hidden issue is going to be, you know, can you trust the Liberal Party? It's convenient now to say, you know, they're going to do a 180 on the carbon tax. They're going to scrap capital gains. They're going to review government spending or shrink the size of government. It makes sense to do that in this context, but are Canadians going to look at this party and say a party that's been driving this message for 10 years, all of a sudden is just going to do a 180 on all these policies? I'm not sure that's going to be very convincing to Canadians. So Donald Trump will be there for sure, but I'm just not sure that's going to be the ballot question for Canadians across this country.
Last word to you, Kathleen, on that, if you could, and then also, where does this leave Jagmeet Singh?
Yeah, so quickly on the ballot box question, I mean, if people are threatened, obviously, by the economic warfare that's being put upon us by Trump, they're going to be asking themselves, who can they trust, right? And they want to trust somebody who holds their values and who won't roll over on things that Canadians fundamentally cherish, whether that's our sovereignty, whether that's our healthcare system, whether that's access to our resources. And you've got to look and actually wonder if Canadians can trust Poilievre on those things, on those values, and whether they're not looking for another leader. On the NDP has some heavy lifting to do. You know, when they ripped up the agreement last summer, they thought it was a game changer, but maybe in retrospect, they should have run against Justin Trudeau. That would have been maybe a better equation for them, but it also could have risked a possible supermajority for the Conservatives. So now they're in this new landscape. Like Poilievre has to rewrite his script, so does Jagmeet Singh, and they need to do it quickly. And how they can do that is making sure that they're prioritizing those values and that people cherish and are worried, that are threatened under Donald Trump and possibly what else he inflicts upon Canadians.
On that lovely note, I will leave it. Our Sunday strategy session. Scott Reid, Shakir Chambers, and Kathleen Monk, thank you so much. When we come back,